Hello everyone, this is TVC News Midday News. More reactions have continued to trail the indefinite suspension of Twitter by the federal government, and the Nigerian Bar Association says there's no constitutional nor legal authority that supports the ban. NBA President Olumide Akpata describes government's decision as illegal and threatened to challenge in court the decision of government to suspend operations of the microblogging site. Nobel laureate Professor Wole Soyinka has joined others in reacting to the indefinite suspension of Twitter by the Nigerian government. Mr. Soyinka described the move as unbecoming of a democratically elected president. According to the Nobel laureate, if Buhari has a problem with the microblogging platform, they should sort it out between them personally, the way former U.S. President Donald Trump did, and not rope in the right to free expression of the Nigerian citizen as collateral damage. However, Nigerians on Saturday opted for the use of virtual private networks to bypass restrictions due to the suspension of Twitter operations by the federal government in the country. According to statistics, about 61.4% of Nigerian social media users use Twitter, 86.2% use Facebook, 81.6% use YouTube, 73.1% use Instagram, and 67.2% use Facebook. That's the Facebook Messenger. Well, we have updates on this development as telecoms operators in Nigeria have now restricted Twitter in Nigeria. That's a day after the federal government announced its indefinite suspension. Twitter users in the country woke up on Saturday encountering difficulty in accessing the microblogging websites, while some navigated the hurdle using virtual private networks, VPN. The Association of Licensed Telecommunication Operators of Nigeria, ALTON, an industry group, confirmed it had received directives from the Nigerian Communications Commission, NCC, the industry regulator, to suspend access to Twitter. The president of ALTON, Gbenga Adebayo, made this known in a statement on Saturday. Now let's talk to Senior Lecturer, Department of Law and Technology, Swansea University, Nnenna Ajufo, on more on this development. Talk to us about what your initial reaction is to the news from Nigeria.
Thank you very much, and it's an absolute pleasure to talk about this very important development in Africa. What has happened in the past few days is quite amusing for a country which is purportedly the giant of Africa. It is most unfortunate, to say the least, that in this age, Nigeria would take such a position. And this comes at a time when states have been involved in discussions focused on responsible state behavior in cyberspace. Part of the 11 UN norms of responsible state behavior in cyberspace is to have regards and respect for human rights. And just a few days ago, about 4 days ago, the UN governmental group of experts released their 2021 report and reaffirmed that open, secure, and accessible ICT environment is essential, and that respect for human rights and fundamental freedom is very pivotal to the role of states in cyberspace. So absolutely, blanket internet shutdowns, generic blocking and filtering of services are considered, even by the UN, to be a violation of international human rights law. It is embarrassing, to say the least, that Nigeria, which should set an example for other African states, will rather poise itself to curtail digital rights. Now, if we can remember, in 2019, the president refused to give assent to the Digital Rights Bill. Now, he cited reasons such as the duplication of efforts and provisions in different laws. It's been almost 3 years. Nothing has been said of the bill, and the different utterances by the Minister of Information and Communications since after the EndSARS movement and now the ban of Twitter, it seemingly appears that there were probably other reasons for refusing to assent to the Digital Rights Bill. Now, no state, absolutely no state, has the right to take away the fundamental rights of its citizens. Having rights expressed online are as fundamental as having them expressed traditionally. So in as much as we agree that human rights can be curtailed in cases of national security, this is not the case. Social media has become an avenue for people to demand open and transparent governance, such as from states. Social media has been a huge positive influence since the time of the Arab Spring. So any state which has a problem with its citizens exercising their freedom of expression is obviously refusing to be held accountable. Now,
Indeed. Let me jump in very quickly. So I understand your point of view. Let us take a minute to look at some of the reasons that
yes.
The Nigerian government has given for its decision. The persistent use of the platform for activities that are capable of undermining Nigeria's corporate existence. So the narrative here is that national security takes preeminence over rule of law, and whatever it is we call freedom of speech also has its own limitation when we explore the concept of national security. If this concept has an element of truth in it, what do you consider to be the standard procedure, the internationally accepted standard for such operation to ensure that it doesn't in any way undermine national security?
Good. Unfortunately, the reality is that states many at times use national security as an alibi to erode human rights. And so the state puts itself in a non-justiciable position of defining what national security is. The international standards for which you weigh national security is always based on proportionality and necessity. And of course, a balance against public interest. Now, what we forget in this case is that we are all agents of justice, including social media hosts, internet intermediaries, internet providers. They also have a responsibility to ensure a secure and trusted cyberspace. What happens with social media takedowns is that users complain and report posts. This is what happened here. Twitter was not a judge in its own cause. An overwhelming majority of Nigerians reported a post. Now, this happens where an online intermediary has to take responsibility. Remember, an ISP provider can be held secondarily liable for defamatory content, for illegal content, for infringement of IP rights. So I think Twitter was rather acting responsibly. What we are not doing is have the conversation about how such a tweet was furthering discordance in Nigeria. So yes, there is a question of national security, but this was one person's tweet, the president's tweet. Now, there are arguments that there are these suspect, reasons, but then would that be proportionate to take away the freedom of expression of over 100 of millions of people? Does that, it doesn't. What I would have expected was some PR. Maybe the Minister of Information says Nigerians are misunderstanding this tweet. Some PR damage. And this throws doubt onto the expertise of people who handle Twitter handles. Oh, the president did not mean it in this way. He's being misinterpreted. So the threshold of national security here burns palely when you think about the freedom of expression, the freedom of information of other people concerned here.
So the president's tweet was brought down, but it's not the first time that Twitter will be bringing down tweets by presidents. Recall what happened with the former U.S. President Donald Trump, who recently has now been suspended for 2 years. How do you expect the world to react to this, particularly when you look at it from the point of view of infringing or the perception of infringement on freedom of speech?
Now, like I said, in as much as human rights are absolute, to an extent, where your right begins is where another person's right, or where your right ends, maybe where another person's right begins. Now, we cannot maintain the absoluteness of the judgment that we must do good even if the heavens will fall, where you may need to take away one person's right to ensure the rights of other people. So, like I said, social media companies, internet service providers also have a responsibility. Imagine if a tweet would rather fuel insecurity. Have we also thought about that? That a simple tweet could also damage so many people's rights if it fuels insecurity. So in as much as there should be checks also on companies such as Twitter or blogs such as Twitter curtailing rights, what we need to measure is proportionality and necessity. If the overwhelming necessity balances well against the public interest, then absolutely, there is no problem. They also are agents of justice, just like myself and just like
The
you.
truth is that fake news have flourished over the years on the platform of micro blogging sites like Twitter. But the honest truth is also that the majority of the populace have opposed attempts by the National Assembly to regulate this platform. Is there a way forward in this quagmire?
We must remember also that the only necessity of Twitter is not just, there is always a balance of good and bad. The necessity of Twitter is not only, fake news and all that. Other fundamental rights are also tied to people's usage of Twitter. Some people's socio-economic rights, people receive information via Twitter, people communicate via Twitter, people buy and sell via Twitter, people advertise, people exchange research.
It provides some level of employment for unemployed Nigerian youth.
Absolutely. But it seems like the overwhelming focus is always this antagonism against the state. Every democratically elected government must allow itself, to be spoken against, to be demanded some form of accountability from. So we so much focus on fake news, we so much focus on speech, we forget that this same blog has provided the socio-economic benefits, other rights for other people, because online violations can also lead to offline abuses. So those are the things we have to think about when we discuss issues like, the way out, absolutely.
It's a good place to live it. Senior Lecturer, Department of Law and Technology, Swansea University, Nnenna Ajufo, thank you so much for talking to us on TVC News.